thanks, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and listen. As Jay said, there is a range of people in the audience who are very experienced with our story, currently have been here since the IPO, and I thank you very much for your support and patience. But there's people also new to the story, and we're also recording it and putting it up on a broker's site. So if you'll bear with me, some of what I have to say may be for that audience because they don't understand the technology, but I will talk about exactly what we've done this year and where I see it going. And then, of course, at the end of the lunch and the recording, you're free to ask me questions to unpick it more in greater detail. I'll answer them as honestly and frankly as I can, bearing in mind the continuous disclosure requirements. It's been a fantastic year for us. The story hasn't fundamentally changed. We're a revenue-generating company that's using AI in the aged care sector. And as COVID demonstrated, there are no two greater combinations, AI and healthcare, to solve aged care. The ageing population is not going away, and as we saw during lockdown, if we hadn't had enough of a message yet from the Royal Commission that you shouldn't end up in residential care, I think COVID demonstrated that place should be a safety net and not the destination. And we have seen again and again people calling our lines and getting in contact because they're fearful of ending up in residential care. It has probably accelerated our adoption of technology by 2 to 5 years, in my estimation. I'll talk a bit about how that works out in a later slide. But we're fully commercialised and we're currently generating revenue. It's been a fantastic year. You don't have to believe me about the technology. We won 2 state awards, which put us into the iAwards and the preeminent technology award in Australia for the ICT industry. We not only took out our 2 categories that we were covered for, very much unbeknownst to me, we took out the overall award, which was a real thrill and testament to the effort that the team has put in, and also how easily understood the problem is that we're trying to solve and how people see we completely address that problem. And then as a follow-up, we're a Deloitte's Rising Star. So we were one of their top 50, where I think we're number 11 in their fastest growing private technology companies. So although you may have your own views, I think looking at the independent umpires in this space brings some credibility to what I have to say. We have a proprietary IoT platform, and this is how you should think about the company. We're not a sensor company. We're not an aged care company. We're an Internet of Things platform that's using AI to aggregate sensor data and then send out notifications. Our product is the notifications and alerts that we send out. The market trends are very strong and increasing. We don't have any problem, I think, in regard to demand for the product. Our success is going to rise and fall on our ability to market into it because there is no strong or dominant market player at the moment. The federal government is increasing their funding in this space. We saw late last year they dropped in another 500 mil to try and solve the aged care problem. We are very closely aligned with all the federal and state ministers. I have another meeting tomorrow at the state level with the minister. We are closely aligned with the Royal Commission and are trying to influence their initial recommendations, which pushed for a funding stream for assistive technology to drive that further upstream, with the outcome, I hope, being that we'll see independent funding of the aged care funding for assistive technology. It's a SaaS business, which means that I don't have to replace my revenue stream each year. We have recurring revenue, and that's an inherent benefit of investing in SaaS technology, as opposed to rocks to China, where every year you have to dig up the same amount of rocks you dug up last year to achieve the same revenue. We retain our clients for many years. The year itself has seen us undergo significant growth off an admittedly very low base, but nonetheless significant order of magnitude growth. Just around this time last year, when I first came on board as CEO and Managing Director and was doing the initial investor briefs, we had 25 units in the field. We have now approaching 300 with up to 350 under binding contract. We will be targeting in the coming 12 to 24 months getting 3,000 units in the field. Because around that point we go cash flow positive, depending on where we price, and I'll talk about our pricing structure a bit more later. The cash receipts have obviously increased significantly, and I just also make a point that when you're looking at our financial statements, the revenue isn't always the best indicator because we have to recognise revenue over a 12-month period. So cash receipts are the best way to judge how we're going in terms of sales. Our overheads, we had a bit of a decrease over the last quarter. I think you'll expect to see our overheads in the main increasing over the coming 12 to 24 months because we're bringing on more staff, particularly in the marketing and sales arena. And our agency agreements has been the most pleasing part of the year, have certainly increased significantly from 3 to 11 over the year, and with more in the pipeline. Just for those uninitiated, the aged care problem is the driving macro force behind our business. And when I talk about aged care, people naturally think about nursing homes. But if we look at the Australian context, and this context is repeatable in every Western and many Asian democracies as well. We spend $20 billion on aged care through the government. Of those $20 billion, there's about 200,000 people who receive that money in nursing homes, nursing home beds, what people think of as aged care. There's close to 900,000 people who receive that as funding assistance to stay in their own home. So the unit metrics for home care are 5 times larger than nursing homes. So that's where we target. And then on top of that, there are 3 to 4 million people who don't receive any of that funding at all and will not receive it because of means testing. And they will privately fund their aged care. So the model to think about is where we got to in the early 90s when the government realised they couldn't fund the pension bill and we had to have compulsory superannuation. That same cohort has moved from their retirement phase and they're now in their ageing phase, and the government can't foot the bill, especially post-COVID. They need $6.5 billion just to catch up, let alone to sustain the story. So that creates stress in the industry. Most of the seniors are choosing to stay in their own home anyway. All these economies are going to experience significant rise across the board, so our aim is to get this right in Australia, then expand internationally. And not only in Western democracies, but we're seeing a similar theme in Asia, where traditionally they have looked after their elderly in their own home as a group format. That is starting to unwind and change. So those baby boomers are creating stress in the aged care market. And we see that in 2 forms. Firstly, we see it in the Royal Commission, where we have poor performance and outcomes in aged care. And that's not due to a broken industry or poor carers. That's due to a systemic failure. I was a pilot in the Air Force for 22 years, and when we investigated an aircraft accident, you never attributed it to pilot error. That was the old way of thinking. There was always a system that failed to cause that poor numpty pilot holding the controls at the end to make the last mistake. It's the same in aged care. That carer is under stress and not able to perform their duties, which is why we see the poor outcomes. And the reason you can tell that's the issue is the financial outcomes. Only 51% of nursing homes make a profit, and all the home care industry is seeing their revenues go backwards. And this trend is occurring both in Australia and internationally. So the government threw $500 million at the problem late last year to buy more home care packages. More people are dying waiting for those home care packages than receive the benefits of that additional money. So while we welcome that response from the Morrison government, and I think you'll see more money being thrown at the problem, there's a limit to it. And they're going to have to return to technology to unlock additional productivity, because the care staff to even spend that money isn't there. So, for example, one of our CEOs of a care organisation who's a client of ours was telling me when someone exits their client base, they're on a level 4, so it's about $50,000 a year they get for a level 4 care. And at level 1, it's about $5,000, $6,000. So they tend to exit when they require more care. To replace that level 4, they require 4 level 1 people to come in through their pipeline. And I said there's no problem getting those people. They can attract them. They can't service them. They haven't got the staff to do so. And the Cert 3 staff that are required to do that weren't in our industry 5 years ago, so they don't exist now. And they're not joining the industry. So they have to turn to technology to solve the problem. And families are seeing this. And so they say, well, Mum, and now that Dad's passed, we're happy for you to stay in your own home, but we're concerned about you. And they tend to turn towards duress systems and devices, pendants, hang around your neck. For elderly men, they hate it because it's a sign that says, I'm frail and aged. In 80% of falls, people don't use that device, those pendants. They don't want cameras in their home, end of story. And they won't use their pendant. It sits in the drawer, or even if they take it out, then they forget to charge it. But even if they take it out of the drawer, put it around their neck, have it charged, in 30% of falls, they won't press that button. And the reason is they don't want to alert their family that they've got a problem because they're fearful of being forced into aged care as a result. And more importantly, it doesn't encompass complete wellness. It's like giving a mobile phone to your P-plater to prevent a car accident. It's great for calling the tow truck or the ambulance afterwards. It's not going to prevent the accident. So in InteliCare, we connect the family, we detect these incidents, and we work to prevent them occurring in the first place. And that prevention is the heart of what we do. Step 1 is to install the sensors in the house. They're mainly passive sensors. You can see them up the back of the room and touch and feel them. But because we are an open architecture IoT system, meaning we are sensor agnostic, we can strap on board a range of additional sensors. There's a radar sensor at the back there that we're currently rolling out into the Department of Communities. So we've customised the solution for them. That radar sensor sits on a ceiling and it's so sensitive that it not only tells their staff that their residents are in bed at night, which is what they're looking for, it detects your respirations, the rise and fall of your chest, and even finer than that, it detects your pulse. So we can do vital signs management without someone having to wear a device all night. We then, over the period of a week, learn what normal behaviour looks like in that house, when they're getting up out of bed each day, how active they are, how often they're preparing meals, whether they're socially isolated. And we send a notification out each day that there is everything normal in Mum and Dad's house. And that push notification is critical. Most of our competitors don't do it. So you've got to go into the app to see what's going on. We don't. It's self-serve. But if something's out of the ordinary, we then send a push notification to say, hey, there's a warning, keep an eye on this, and if it's severe enough, we'll send an alert via text message as well, which requires you to cancel it before it goes away. And step 4 is the critical part here. These alerts and notifications allow you to do things that will prevent a trigger event that causes loss of independence for someone with a disability or the elderly living independently in their own home. The kinds of things we're looking for. Movement, straight off the bat. Has their movement around the house reduced or increased over a period? And both those things are telling. Reduction in movement can point to many things, including a general loss of mobility as they're ageing, but it can also point to such things as if they're staying in their bedroom during the day, that maybe they've got an infection and they require further attention. Increasing movement, particularly at night, has been used by some of our clients to diagnose early onset dementia or worsening dementia. With one of our clients recently, we saw a big increase in his movement, particularly nighttime movement. We knew he had dementia. He was living with his wife at the time, so we were able to pick up that change just on his behaviour. And not long after that, this gentleman passed away. But the family knew that this was happening at night when they were sleeping, and were able to put in place palliative care and start to prepare for that outcome. We have meals detection. Loss of meals is a big precursor to malnutrition. As people age, they tend to reduce their appetite, so you can send a nutritionist around to increase their carb intake. Things like bathroom visits at night are critical. If you go to the bathroom at least once a night, your risk of a fall increases by 50%. If it's more than that, it doubles. We look at social isolation. Those that are socially isolated have a 30% chance of falling, greater than the normal population. And even things like urinary tract infections. So if we look at the combination of nighttime bathroom visits can point to a urinary tract infection. 40% of people presenting at a hospital with a fall had an underlying undiagnosed infection. So we surface this data in two ways. InteliCare Pro, which is used by our B2B clients to triage their clients and allow those with greater issues to float to the top and those that don't require as much care to be down to the bottom. They have a longer lead time, but they tend to buy in bulk. The B2C front is used by our families and the individual carers. It's the app on the phone that you get. And both work in concert. It's not an either or, you can have both. And that's used by families to check in on mum and dad, but also individual carers to look at their client before they step in the home. Particularly for disability care, this is a pretty important thing for them because if they're dealing with someone, for example, who has mental health issues, they want to know what's gone on in the last 24, 48 hours before they step into that household. The value propositions aren't just within aged care itself, particularly for governments. It allows them to have a combination with telehealth to isolate people with COVID and look after them remotely. But fundamentally, it allows them to reduce the aged care tax burden, particularly through the state hospital system. For elderly and disability care, they are able to de-risk their operations. They don't end up with someone having a fall between visits and being on the ground for days on end. It allows them to increase their productivity through that B2B dashboard that I demonstrated, so they can look after multiple clients at once. And lastly, and this is where it's particularly exciting, we're seeing a lot of traction on this front, it allows them to increase their revenue streams. So that monitoring of the dashboard, the preventative approach and providing additional services and advice to their clients is a revenue stream that's untapped here to now. And they're now able to offer that as a service above and beyond what they would otherwise provide. Hospitals, it's all about prevention of readmissions. I think with governments, I will see in the future governments having a bulk stock of these systems and private hospitals which they deploy to people as they come out of hospital, particularly for over 65s and those with chronic issues, to monitor how they're going and work with it remotely. So I was at a telehealth conference on Friday and we can see hospitals already within Perth here using this kind of principle for their ICUs, where they have a central monitoring centre monitoring people who are in an ICU because they can't always go in there and support them directly. They will, I think, over time extend that to the wider community and push for greater hospital in the home using remote monitoring and telehealth diagnosis. And lastly, insurers. In the Australian insurance environment, there is a risk equalisation policy, and this is legislated. So what happens is all the insurers, the 31 of them who offer private health, tip money into a fund, a joint fund, because they can't discount their premiums based on age. So the younger people in Australia pay more than they should for private health insurance to look after the elderly. And that's as it should be, that's fine. But to level that out, the way it's run is that they tip money into the risk equalisation pool, so those insurers like, for example, HBF, who have an older client base, take more money from that pool. If they can then reduce their payouts as a consequence of that, they make money. In the US, it's even a greater value proposition where they have health maintenance organisations where you pay a regular fee, like an insurance fee, and they will look after your total health outcomes beginning to end, cradle to grave. So if they've got incentives to buy remote monitoring technology to ensure that they reduce those hospital costs for people who are on that kind of program. It would be remiss not to address how telehealth has impacted the industry, as I prefixed earlier in my talk. We've seen a greater uptake of this technology, but it's only part of the problem. If you're using telehealth, you have someone on the other end of that call who can't be dealt with person to person. They're either living remotely or isolating. So it's one thing to diagnose their issue and then use e-prescriptions to send out whatever pharmaceuticals they need. But if you don't know what's going on after that, you've only half solved the problem. So we see the ability to combine with telehealth as a very strong value proposition that's, I think, been accelerated in the market. In particular, I'll talk about it shortly, but we're part of Microsoft Azure's scale-up program. So we're in technical discussions with them on how we would surface InteliCare data onto the screen during a telehealth consult. As I mentioned at the outset, we're a SaaS business model. It's the strength of our system. So people pay for the hardware up front, and that ranges from about $800 to $1,300 depending on the size of the household. There's a reasonable margin in that amount, and I've got room to manoeuvre to reduce that margin because I don't intend to make significant money out of the hardware side of the business. It's the recurring software subscription, which is higher margin, that I think will form the core of our future investment thesis. The hardware itself is very customisable, so we've actually had recently an installation where our base system comes with 8 sensors. We recently installed a 20-sensor household. And that price for the hardware wasn't an issue. And the reason was this lady had been forced into residential care by the public trustee. She'd come out of hospital, gone into respite care, and then forced into residential care. Her neighbour made herself the guardian for this lady, found us online, and convinced the public trustee to pull her out of residential care and back into her own home with InteliCare installed. And we've seen that kind of thing happen again and again. So having a different model where the hardware can be customised to suit that individual, I think will be a critical competitive advantage for us. Our distribution initially started with our B2B sales, the home care service providers that I mentioned earlier, because that's the low-hanging fruit. We distribute to them through 2 types of sales. Firstly, there's a bulk order, and we've seen that recently happen in New South Wales with CCMB, and they'll buy it in bulk and roll it out across their client base. But underlying that, we also have incremental organic sales with these organisations, where as they get new clients in and put them under a care plan, they're purchasing our product and rolling that out on onesies and twosies basis. We've since rolled out our e-commerce platform. That serves 2 purposes. It gives us a B2C portal and channel to market where we don't have a distributor in place. But secondly, it is a great tool for us to use digital marketing to explore what are those friction points in our sales process that we can streamline or remove or change. For example, pricing, messaging, targeted advertising to reflect what we need to do as we start to scale. So over time, I think you'll see with our go-to-market a larger drive as we refine our marketing strategy through other channels to market, particularly through distributors. And in the long run, distributors who sell both to care organisations but also have a retail face, selling other assisted living technologies such as walkers and frames and beds and lifters, I think those types of organisations will probably form about 80% of our sales, and will start to retreat from becoming a direct-to-consumer provider and more of a wholesaler. The other part of this is we've started to engage more strongly with our marketing strategy. We have recently signed on 2 agencies, a media agency and a creative agency, and we're starting to push out what our channel marketing looks like across more than digital. So we're talking out of home, radio and TV in the next 12 months. We are a partner with Microsoft. This has been a fantastic inroad for us. Not only do we get hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of credits, which underpins our ability to deliver a very cost-effective SaaS business model, but they also have endorsed us as a co-sell partner. So I regularly, every week, meet with their marketing and their sales teams, and we get leads into government and large ASX 100 organisations because their sales teams are incentivised to sell our product through commissions they receive from Microsoft. Our roadmap ahead. It's focused on those three words: connect, detect, prevent. In terms of the detection, we're trialling a range of additional sensors. We've recently put our eye health sensors into pilot, which is a range of vital sign monitoring devices, blood pressure, oxygenation, and those kinds of things. We're getting more and more agile in being able to find these devices and quickly integrate them into our platform. Secondly, improving our artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have PhD level people engaged now who are looking at the long-term ability for us to identify disease and illness across all of our data systems, not just to detect an immediate thing like a fall, but what does diabetes look like? What does early onset dementia look like? And can we start to detect these things automatically and send those notifications and alerts? Once we get good at that, and it requires a significant amount of data and very good expert annotation, in the blue sky, we will have a very large data stream that's well annotated and that's usable by research organisations and medical organisations through an API, and we'll be able to productise that in the future. And lastly, the product and services integrations. This is focused on care organisations who have a care management system. So they've got an enterprise system that they use to look after the people under their care. They don't necessarily want to dance between two systems, InteliCare'S dashboard and their own system. They want those notifications and alerts to come in through an API, be surfaced in their own platform, and then result in a changed rostering or care outcome automatically. So we've been working with organisations to see how can we integrate those two. We have a number underway behind the curtain at the moment, which are looking promising at this stage. But that will be a longer run thing. But ultimately, in the distance, I see our dashboard being replaced by their own in-house systems. Since IPO, it's been a great run. We're well capitalised now. We just have over $3 million in the bank as I left the office this morning. We received a large cash injection of around $400,000 from our R&D grant recently. It gives us a great runway, but the truth of it is I'm not about hoarding our cash. This is a very open market. There is no dominant player here. There is no leader in the market. There is a vacuum. Hence, a lot of my time in the last few months has been spent on our marketing outcomes. It's becoming less about the product, which is working. It's developing well. I have extreme confidence in our CTO, Mike Tappinen, and co-founder to keep that running along. My challenge is to make sure that we execute on the go-to-market strategy. So the team behind InteliCare is critical to that. Greg Leach, who many of you know, is the chairman, and he and Mike have an extremely long pedigree in building up and executing on technology companies. The work Mike does day to day is fantastic. He's a great experimentalist. He's a great innovator, and we have a lot of fun in the office finding new ways to improve our data stream. So it's an AI opportunity coupled with aged care that's already producing revenue. The macro forces aren't going away. This will be the future of aged care. I have absolutely no doubt about it. There will be a number of winners in this, and I think InteliCare is going to be one of them. Thank you very much.